now too.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for jumping on with us today. We're just going to give it a minute for everyone to log on to the Zoom, and then we'll get started. Looks like we've got a great crowd joining us. Just going to give a moment for everyone to hop on live, and then we'll give it a go. Okay, looks like we have a good amount of people. So hi, everyone. My name's Courtney Brown, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at EDB. I'll be your host today for our webinar, Oracle Migration, Business and Technical Considerations. I'm joined by Tom Rieger, Senior Sales Engineer at EDB. Before I turn it over, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded. We'll be sharing a recording along with the slides after the broadcast to the email that you used to register for today's session. All of your lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the question panel. We expect our presentation to last most of the time today, but we'll allot any extra time to Q&A. And with that, I will hand it over to Tom.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Good day, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you may be or wherever you may be watching this recording. My name is Tom Rieger, and I'm a customer success engineer here at EDB. And I wanted to also make sure to call out that we will be doing some online polling today, because I want to make sure that as we are making certain assumptions and I make certain comments, that you feel that in some cases these are accurate. And the beauty of online polling during a Zoom call like this is you then get to see what the greater audience thinks of this as well. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? First of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming. Some of you are not in what I would consider prime business hours in attending this webinar, because there are, I believe, 64 countries represented who signed up for this webinar, as we're here looking to talk about this massively engaging topic called Oracle to Postgres migrations. So I do want to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for participating today. That being said, just want to kind of go over a little bit of an agenda purview here, because I feel like this is more than a technical conversation. This is a legal and a financial conversation. So what's going on around the landscape of databases as a whole? And then when it comes to how do you actually methodically get through a technical, legal, and financial consideration to have a repeatable methodology. And in some cases, through this, I'll be bringing up examples, case studies, and why Postgres to some degree, why Postgres is ready. Firstly, I like to call out, I'll call it third-party independent voices to validate something. One, if anyone goes to dbengines.com, it's a great website that analyzes all the things going on in this world of databases. And I've been around databases a long time. I'm still amazed at 2021, they're still tracking over 350 database technologies out there. But one of the things they called out in a recent blog here earlier this year is how now commercial licensed software is less popular than open source software is. And this graph here kind of shows us an 8-year view of the slope of curves as certain things have gone up and certain things have gone down. Another view, looking at trends.google.com, again, kind of a macro relevance of a topic. I think it's interesting here, not just around Oracle as being a kind of a negative slope on the curve, but also other traditionally commercial licensed database technologies. So I wanted to use this as a moment, I think, as a proof point of why we're all here on this webinar today, to understand how do we do what's next and what's right in technology, in databases. I would like to ask everyone on this webinar today a polling question. Is, do you think open source is ready for, I'll call it, top tier database applications? Is that a yes, a maybe, a not sure? Courtney, go ahead and open it up.
Here we go.
Thanks, everyone. I always like asking questions, not just to keep you on your toes, but I think it helps drive some insight for us as the presenters and us as EDB as a company to make sure that we're not completely, off on left field. but at the same time, for everyone who's on this webinar today, to have a feedback loop around what the greater audience across 64 different countries feel around this topic. All right, Courtney, I'll let you decide when you close it out and share the results.
Yes, it looks like we have about a majority. So I'm going to end the polling. Here we go. Share the results with everyone.
So I take two things away from this. So some of you are here because you firmly believe it, and some of you are here to validate the art of the possible. And then for those of you who aren't sure, let's get through that. So the maybes, let's get through that. The not sures, let's get through that. As I also help my friends who say yes on this call to think about that as well. So thank you for that feedback. There is a grand change in the database landscape. I would call it a renaissance of what's going on in databases. I was around my first job out of college. I touched the mainframe for a little while, and I knew that was not what I wanted to do. And I spent most of my career actually doing relational technologies on Unix, Linux, and Windows-based platforms. And so I knew that was and that's what we've all been doing for the last 25 or so years. Now we have where we're at next on this. So we have a combination of open source, we have fit for purpose databases, and we have this thing called cloud. But what's also going on is where is the innovation taking place? Where is development happening? And not just within the databases, but where are people developing their next total applications and what tools are they using? Because 20 years ago, we're using proprietary tools talking to commercially licensed software on, in some cases, proprietary Unix platforms, where today it's open source, moving to open source, and open source. And also, where are databases in supporting what you need tomorrow for a platform? We have gone through this thing that I still giggle about, saying we go from bare metal servers to virtualized servers. And now, in terms of what a platform means to someone, it's become quite complex because of what does cloud mean to you? What does containers mean to you? Also, we're trying to drive more autonomous computing. I'm still amazed all these years later how hard a database is to maintain and to optimize. And finally, what's the next great place to save money in an IT budget? Because unless you're working for a nonprofit saving the world, and thank you for those people who are, the rest of us are out here trying to find ways to do more with less for our organization using technology as the premise. And let's be honest, that's the reason computers were developed the way they were decades and decades ago. How do we do more with less? How do we do it faster? And now we're hitting that next realm, especially at the data layer, of how we're trying to do more with less. And oh my gosh, if I hear one more person say the word transform to me, my head's going to pop off. But I think it really fits into what's going on in terms of driving change. And again, the word renaissance comes to mind for me. One of those big changes is something that's fundamental and dear to all of our hearts, called software going end of life or end of service. And this is the latest calendar off of Oracle's website in terms of looking at where their roadmap is. So for instance, if you're on version Oracle 11 or 12, or even as we sit here on 18, you're hitting into that window of time where, guess what? You're going to pay them more money for extended support, or you're going to upgrade, or you're just going to say, you know what? I give up. Let's migrate. Now, what's interesting is I actually had a client call last week where they actually gave me a pretty detailed experience of what the Oracle presentation was like, as I'm sure some of you on this call have Oracle positioned in their Oracle Cloud. And he says, yes, and we almost laughed out loud when they said it was $10,000 per year per core US to use the Oracle Cloud. By the way, everywhere in my presentation that I can, I put a footnote at the bottom around a link to validate the comments I'm making to drive a fact-based conversation. And also, if you happen to go to this web page around oracle.com/cloud/pricelist.html, it reminds me of the movie Good Will Hunting, when Matt Damon is at the chalkboard solving the theorem at MIT with the professor looking on. That is what it feels like you're still getting into and trying to figure out what is the right price for Oracle even today. Is it simpler? No, it's just annual, and it's just OpEx instead of CapEx. I'm also involved in some research. In fact, there's a webinar I'm presenting tomorrow, and there'll be a white paper available shortly thereafter around drivers and impediments to corporate technology change. In this research, like I said, it's closing actually today. We're doing the webinar with the partner tomorrow that we're doing it with. And one of the questions I ask is, what is the priority in your organization at this time? And the priority in general across organizations is about half looking to transform, about 15% looking to maintain, but there's almost 30% looking to cut costs. Now, mind you, as we sit here in May of 2021, everyone has some idea. So the not sure was zero. But secondarily, I want to highlight too from this research is we asked a question, where are you looking to reduce your spend? And I thought it was very enlightening and reinforcing when the subtotal of the audience stated this as that big blue bar out to the right. So and there's some other comments I'll make here shortly, but I would also like to ask everyone who's on this webinar, where do you feel in your organizations you're looking to reduce your spend in 2021? And please click all that apply. Is it with IBM? Is it with Oracle? Are you trying to do something with SAP? Is Microsoft causing you problems? I know some people are actually trying to reduce their spend with Salesforce or with content management companies like OpenText. Or let's be honest, maybe your organization isn't looking to reduce spend, or you have others. So always looking to help me understand what you think is going on while I am utilizing some very recent research to share with you what we see is going on. Courtney, I'll let you decide when you want to flip it around.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll give everyone about 5 more seconds.
Perfect.
To get your
and I do appreciate everyone participating here. This is all done from a very educational and engaging perspective, and I hope you feel that as well. So that being said, I'm very curious to see what this looks like.
Great. Here we go. So we're going to end the polling and then share the results with everyone.
Well, obviously, since this thing is talking about Oracle to Postgres, I would say I maybe had a bit of a process and data bias in the audience I asked this of. But I think it is also interesting the other technologies that folks are looking to reduce their spend on. So rather it is Microsoft, because I think there's a big move from Microsoft on-prem into the cloud, whatever that cloud means to you. But at the same time, you see things like SAP and IBM and others. So I appreciate that, and thank you for that response, everybody. Another piece of the research, I'm sorry, let's go back to the research shortly. So what brought you here today is to talk about not just Oracle to Postgres from a technology perspective, but from a holistic perspective of what does it take to actually do an effective migration. And it is kind of that three-legged stool: technical, legal, and business. Mind you, I was raised by a mother who is a CPA and accountant, and my family is full of lawyers and judges. So I'm always thinking, as a technologist, in the back of my mind, what can I legally do and what makes sense from a financial perspective? And that is where, as we think about evaluating how to get from Oracle onto something better like a Postgres, you also have these 4 components to consider: the schemas, the data, the application layer over the top, and then also what is your next platform you're moving to? And how do you drive that first success? Because the first success, people believe. So you have to make sure you pick that first success, because I'm betting all of you have not just one Oracle application. You potentially have hundreds or thousands. So what is that first one to drive the right result? And that is where on the right-hand side here, you see things like compatibility and final fit near the bottom, because we need to understand the top pieces as we get into what makes sense to do a deeper analysis of otherwise. So I happen to mention here too around schemas, data, infrastructure, and application code. It all starts from everyone feels their Oracle environment is a bit of a snowflake. And I mean that in terms of uniqueness of snowflake. And how do we make sure we understand how to get from your current state into the better state, the less expensive state, one in which you are on a platform that makes sense for your ongoing business strategy. And there's all kinds of things we do here at EDB that we add to Postgres and what we call our advanced server that that allows at the most granular level of the database to have not just column types and schema types and index types, but also things like support for PLSQL and features like optimizer hints. The list goes on and on and on, built into the Postgres kernel. It is not an extension to the optimizer. That would slow things down. We actually take the latest version of open source Postgres and compile this into the optimizer. We call it the Redwood extension. And it allows you to take all of these particular Oracle-centric data types and move them into Postgres without any changes whatsoever. I'm working with a lot of clients right now where they have a lot of XML data types or a lot of blob or clob types inside Oracle, and they need a nice way to move those into a Postgres environment and to get off of their Oracle environment. In fact, one of them, 2/3 of a 100 terabyte database is XML data types, and they're moving from on-prem into the cloud. How do you do that effectively? That's a big lift and shift. And oh, by the way, it's a tier 1 platform that has 10,000 concurrent users. First of all, we start with something that all of you have access to today called our migration portal. And it is a very simple multi-step process. 1, download a piece of SQL from the portal. 2, run it against your Oracle environment where it interrogates the Oracle DDLs, all the libraries. 3, take the results of that analysis. And 4, upload it into the portal, and we'll give you, and this is kind of a screenshot here on the right of the first of 17 pages of an analysis, a schema report. And the most interesting part of the schema report that everyone always looks at is right here where it says, what's the percentage compatibility of EDB Postgres Advanced Server compared to your Oracle environment? We've done this, I've done this with a client all the way down to Oracle 9 or up to the latest versions of Oracle. So we have this end-to-end portal that allows you to have a very quick way to evaluate where's that first success going to be. And more importantly, it gives you this one-click Postgres launch. So it will take what it analyzed out of your Oracle environment and give you what you need to actually launch that exact environment in Postgres. We also have a migration toolkit. So, because I just had this come up with a client yesterday, the client was all excited about moving to EPAS, and their idea of a migration portal tool was to use the open source Aura to BG tool. Well, that's great if you just want to use Oracle into Community Postgres and put everything through the same sausage grinder to make it fit into Postgres. Our migration tool understands what we can do inside Postgres so you don't change it. So it understands how to do things to connect to Oracle, to understand how to move data, and to put it into Postgres. Most importantly, it works with other databases as well. I don't want to think that even though this is about Oracle to Postgres as a conversation, everyone has a multitude of binaries running in a multitude of servers from different vendors. So if you're trying to get to an open source first mindset with your database layer finally, the migration tool allows you to do this against multiple databases as well. We also then bring, let's transition from technical into legal and support, because I have this happen all the time. A client says, well, our Oracle EULA basically says we can reduce our cores down to almost 0, but we pay the same price. Well, we work with a partner called Palisades Compliance out of California. The gentleman who started Palisades Compliance created and ran the contract team inside Oracle. So lo and behold, he knows what's going on there to help clients unwind their legal aspects. Another company we work with is called Rimini Street. They are the largest third-party support provider of Oracle in the world. Because one of the things organizations worry about is, yes, we know we're still on some old version of Oracle, but we still need to have supported software in our data center. Well, if you want to find a way to unwind from Oracle and have alternatives, Rimini Street from a support perspective can be that for you. So I just wanted to call out, there are options because people feel like they're kind of stuck sometimes. Financial considerations. Again, my mother's voice in my head as an accountant. There are all these ways in which we can help organizations understand their deeper direct and indirect considerations when it comes to costs, because nothing starts until a finance person says so. So we have also been very involved with organizations who, especially during this time of cost cutting and transformation, dare I say, that the next project is funded by money saved from the previous project. So for us to come in and help give you, dare I say, same year ROI opportunities in migrating to Postgres is an imperative. So we help understand both the cost considerations from a direct and indirect. So everything from the Oracle licenses and the server costs, and even what's the electricity consumption in that server you're running right now, or indirect costs like facility costs. You also have fixed and variable costs. Again, you have a certain number of people across a whole lot of Oracle environments, or you have a certain number of square feet of a data center floor across a whole lot of Oracle environments, fixed and variable costs. But then there's also the next big consideration, which is, well, I have this over here. How much will I use over here? What does that look like? What does my future look like in terms of a sizing perspective? CPU, RAM, storage, and network, the four fundamental ingredients of all computing. What do I need going forward? And also, a lot of what gets people hooked on Oracle is they're using things like Oracle RAC, Oracle Exadata. They've got these very proprietary, high availability data replication needs for very high-end uptime. So 5 nines, so it's 5 minutes and 15 seconds a year downtime types of scenarios. So how do you evaluate and get to the bottom of that? Because just moving Oracle to Postgres from a single server perspective is one thing. It's all the other noise in and around it where it gets complicated. And then finally, how can we help you understand what that total cost of ownership savings forecast looks like over time? Because there is no, I'm assuming everyone on the call understands ROI and TCO. In this case, the total cost. What is my, if I stay on my status quo, what does my cost structure look like? And if I happen to go through the looking glass and believe what Tom is telling me, and I do that, what is my savings? What is my 5-year cost? There is an area of this in which we at EDB, as the largest purveyors of Postgres, we've been doing a lot of research on this front in terms of what is possible. And if one of those things that you're looking to do with your Oracle workloads is to move them to a cloud, we have done a lot of work to size those environments. And I did a webinar on April 7th. Oh my gosh, Courtney, that was 5 weeks ago, around cloud and databases, value sizing, and best practices. And on that webinar, I got into the details of the work we did. So what do I mean by that? We took a standard workload, HammerDB, a transactional workload. And we have a constant workload, and we could scale that from a concurrency and data size perspective. We then ran that over different combinations of things against Postgres and virtual machines. And also, just so you realize what's going on around the database as a service offerings, we did it against RDS and Aurora and Amazon. We did it against single server and flexible server in Azure. And we did it against the Google Cloud Services Postgres DBaaS offerings as well, to come up with apples to apples comparisons. Not just technical comparisons, but also financial comparisons. So we scale this in terms of concurrency, in terms of database size, in terms of what I call the t-shirt sizes, or the small t-shirt is 4 CPUs and 16 and 32 gigs of RAM. And you scale that binarily up to finally you get to 32 CPUs and 256 on the extra large size. But also across clouds. We ran over 270 separate benchmark instances across everything I just described, so that we could come up with a playbook, a sizing guide, a scorecard for organizations like you to understand, if I have X in Oracle over here and I want to move to Y over here, what is that right moment? We generated a lot of data and indexes, and every time we did it, we blew it up, started over again, and everyone started from the same place in terms of running the workload. So very defensible, very engaging conversation. We also learned a lot, both in terms of successes, and we also found a lot of interesting factoids as well relating to the different clouds from both a performance, but also more importantly, a financial perspective. And I would like to quickly take a time here to give you some idea of what we did here, because I could see where this as a Oracle to Postgres conversation is very applicable. So if I take my 4 t-shirt sizes and I use a standard size of 120 gig database, OLTP workload, 96 concurrent threads on the latest Postgres running for 30 minutes, apples to apples, best tuning efforts to Postgres. And I look at my performance metrics, you can see here where this is my transactions per minute. Divide that by 60 if you're transactions per second person. But more importantly, we also took a very pragmatic approach to look at the total system price divided by performance to come up with a price performance metric. Because this isn't about getting the fastest result at all cost. This is about engaging in a conversation around price performance. Again, nothing happens, the accountant says so. As you scale up, you can see here where across the clouds, I'm getting certain both performance metrics on the left and financial metrics on the right. Now, the point in everything I just showed you is especially in this area across clouds where I was getting certain performance metrics depending on the size of the environment, CPU, RAM, and also behind the scenes, I have all the storage network parameters as well. Now, let's take what I just described from a scoring perspective across clouds, from a transactions per minute perspective, and let's apply that to, let's say, an existing environment you have in Oracle, because that's what we're trying to get to. What's that sizing effort look like? Well, if you start with an environment like this on the left, and you happen to run HammerDB against it as a benchmark kit, like I just did, because HammerDB as a benchmark kit runs across databases. It runs against Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Redis, and so on. And you get to a certain performance number. In this case, let's say that box can do 500,000 transactions a minute. Sounds like a big number. And oh, by the way, you're paying for that big number. Let's say the total burden cost, both in terms of the variable cost against direct Oracle maintenance plus total burden is a number. Take that dollar amount divided by the transaction throughput, and you get a cost per transaction per minute. Well, the previous screen I just showed you was doing that exact same thing across all the clouds from an annualized basis. What if I could do something like this? And I take, 16 cores and 128 gigs of RAM. Let's say I do a like size environment using Postgres Advanced Server, where we can look and smell like Oracle in a cloud of your choosing. In this case, I choose Red Hat as the operating system. And I can get, and from my previous table on this large t-shirt size, I can get about 600,000 transactions a minute. But now my annual cost is reduced by 80%. So I'm trying to get at this correlation that we respect between cost and performance, because they go hand in hand. They are not separate and to be looked at separately. They need to be respected together. And the results of that is a cost per transaction per view. Now, mind you, HammerDB is emulating an OLTP environment. It's about 75% reads and 25% inserts, updates, and deletes. And it is not meant to be an exact replica of maybe a workload you're putting against Oracle, but it gives you an apples to apples referenceable architecture of a workload to now compare across a holistic database platform. So I am curious from a polling perspective, and I think this is our last poll, I promise. What is the biggest issue you see for migrating off of Oracle? Is it technical? Is it legal? Or is it financial? Or is it some combination of the three? This is an area that if I go ask 50 different people this question, I feel I'll get 50 different answers. So I'm very curious from your perspective in coming to this webinar today, or in watching this recording after the fact, what you feel the biggest issue is in migrating off of Oracle. Courtney, I'll let you decide when you want to flip it around.
Yes, we'll give it 5 more seconds, just give some people some warning. Okay, there we go. It looks like we have a majority. So I'll end the polling and here are the results.
Yeah, so you came here today, I think somewhat appreciating that, yes, there's a lot of technical complexities between schema, data, workload, and platform. But there's also, and I hear this all the time too, is even once you get through the technical stuff, do you understand your Oracle legal agreement? Have you gone to accounting with a methodology to justify the spend? Because any change comes with risk. So how can we at EDB help you across all 3 of those measures? And this is where we have an assessment process. So we have both documentation, methodologies, and services to help organizations go from end to end to understand where you are today, to bring that top-down funnel approach, to understand the technical, legal, and financial characteristics, and then to go find those initial successes. Because nothing starts like this until you create one success. But that one success turns into an explosive opportunity to do a lot more. And we here at EDB, I mentioned the portal here on the left. We have the migration tool. We also bring with our replication engine the ability to replicate from Oracle to Postgres and back again. Didn't know if you knew that. And there's other ways to actually communicate with Oracle, either as a pull or a push. For instance, for those of you who are deep into Postgres, there's this thing called foreign data wrappers that makes Oracle look like an external table, and you can draw things into Postgres through the foreign data wrapper. We also bring, if you are using the Oracle call level interface, we have an OCI for Postgres, along with JDBC and ODBC and all these other drivers over the top of the database to help things like the workload migration to be easier. And we've also found with open source tools, messaging frameworks like a Kafka or some of these integrated platforms as a service tools to allow you to have an event-driven architecture to move things into Postgres from Oracle. I mentioned Oracle compatibility inside the database. This is kind of the summary list, the baker's dozen, dare I say, of things that we add to Postgres. And with every release of Postgres, we're always looking to fix bugs and add new capabilities to make this even easier for clients. But most importantly, we bring a methodology, an end-to-end methodology, depending on where you are in the journey, to understand how you can get there technically, legally, and financially. Things like business value assessments, and to, again, find those right opportunities to migrate. Finally, at the bottom, I want to highlight too that EDB, one of the things I really like about working here is we are the only organization that brings a global Postgres-focused education and certification program to the world. And we make it very easy for those of you who speak and live Oracle to understand how to speak Postgres and how to appreciate the differences. So why Postgres? Why is it winning against Oracle? Well, I think it's because, first of all, you're working with a technology that's been around for some time, but it's around its diversity of use cases, diversity of workloads, and also, especially over the last 5 years, because this has become the new big thing, is how to deploy, whether it's in a virtual machine environment, a virtual machine driven appliance, whatever container strategy you want to take, or whatever cloud you want to define, whether it's something on-premise or something in a public cloud or a private cloud. That is where we at EDB do a lot of work to help Postgres fit into all of those scenarios, get them certified, get them working with the other pieces and parts of those things that exist in those different deployment platforms. And oh, by the way, Postgres has been around for some time. As it came out of UCal Berkeley from Dr. Michael Stonebreaker and was birthed in the mid-90s, because I have vivid memories and I worked in Informix. And at Informix, we bought a company called Illustra, which is his first inclination of productizing Postgres. And so I know how strong this was even 25 years ago. But as we've got into the 21st century and EDB came in to help drive all of those things necessary to bring open source Postgres into the data center, there's been a lot of technical accomplishments along with mergers and acquisitions. So we acquired Second Quadrant last year because they brought a lot of capabilities and people to the forefront, as we are all here making open source Postgres better. With every iteration of things that we learn about Postgres, we feed that back into the community, just as we take what the latest is coming out of the community and put it into what we do every day for clients. And this includes some of the people here, including Dr. Stonebreaker, along with other people who are primary contributors to the community itself. We are, as a company, the largest contributor back into Postgres, and we're very active on that front. Whether you use PG Admin and Dave Page or other aspects of performance, optimization, the list goes on and on and on. So I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all of the folks who contribute back into Postgres, whether you were in EDB or you were watching this webinar and part of the contributing process, because open source doesn't happen effectively, innovation doesn't happen without the village, without the ecosystem. What do we bring, though, to add to Postgres from a technology perspective? We also bring support, services, and training to the forefront. Because when you think about tier one, high volume, highly important systems of record for a corporation, There are things you expect to need that commercial software has been giving to you over the years. It may not have been that good as time has gone on. Opening up a tech support ticket with Oracle is not always the best experience, but you at least have that. So we bring that validation and all of those things to surround Postgres from a technology perspective, a services perspective, and also from an ecosystem and a community perspective. So we're always driving to make sure that organizations are supporting Postgres as a database with their solutions, for instance, or that consulting firms have their consultants educated on Postgres effectively. I mentioned the tools here, but it's worth calling out too, rather it's about high availability and data replication, kind of those HADR, those business continuity requirements with high availability, replication, and backup recovery, or it's about administration. So we're here on a call talking about Oracle to Postgres. Oracle Enterprise Manager is what you may be used to in Oracle. We bring Postgres Enterprise Manager because Postgres Enterprise Manager allows you to manage hundreds or thousands of Postgreses, that's a plural for Postgres, and do a lot of very standards-driven administration, but also monitoring and bringing forth ideas of index recommendations, security recommendations, configuration recommendations to your Postgres environment. I mentioned the migration opportunities and the tools we offer between the Portland Toolkit, and also we have a level 3 Kubernetes containerization of Postgres that is now available for consumption as well. So why us? Why Postgres? It really comes into some of the things I just described, but all of this doesn't matter if it doesn't equal cost savings. One of the questions we asked during this research that I described earlier was, why do you think open source is so pervasive? The number one answer, innovation. The number two answer, cost savings. The number three answer, terms and conditions of consuming the technology. Now, when I say cost savings, I've been in many a scenario where I could say to somebody, well, I could save you 15 or 20%. That doesn't work today. We start talking about cost savings of 60, 70, 80% that organizations see by moving to Postgres with EDB. Now, I wouldn't be doing my duty as a big supporter of Postgres if I also did not make sure that everyone knew about Postgres Vision coming up June 22nd and 23rd. So I hope that everyone is able to participate in this free, repeat, free, no cost event. You can just go to postgresvision.com to register. And I believe I heard they're posting the agenda next week or in 2 weeks. Along with, you can see that they're growing the speaker pool of those people who are presenting across the world as well. So please make sure you participate in Postgres Vision by going to postgresvision.com. So I want you to just, as we're now 40 minutes into this webinar, I just wanted to make sure I covered off on those things that I started with around what I was hoping to accomplish for you. Firstly, there's a major change in the database landscape. Where's innovation taking place? Where are you going to get those right terms and conditions you expect in the modern computing world? And where are you going to get it at the price that you want to pay for it? Those are big considerations. The second one, technical. How do you get from Oracle into Postgres? Or schemas, datas, app logic, and platform, and how we can help you do that. But you know what? That all doesn't matter if we can also not cover off on the legal considerations and the financial considerations. Because again, nothing happens indeed until somebody in accounting says you can do it. And to have a repeatable methodology, doing something once and going back and reinventing again is not repeatable. That is a problem. So organizations who have hundreds or thousands of Oracle environments are needing a repeatable process to understand how to properly evaluate, port, regression test, and go live. Because all the while, a lot of what we're describing here, your end users may not see any changes. We're just trying to reduce cost by changing the underlying database. So how do we make sure we make that with minimal or no risk as possible? And finally, Postgres as an open source community and as an open source technology, how do we at EDB bring enterprise readiness to the conversation with support, services, what we do around the toolings and the database itself, along with training and certification to help everyone understand how to take best advantage of Postgres. In closing, I want to state that if you have any questions at all, please enter them into the Zoom Q&A area. And what I want to do is to take these questions away and answer these for you kind of methodically, because at least from some of the initial ones that I saw as I was multitasking talking to you, they get very specific in nature. But if you have any questions, comments, wants, needs, desires, please put those in the Q&A area because I will see those personally. There will be an exit survey. I want to know what you thought of this webinar. Did I bring forth any new enlightenments for you? Or was it boring and horrible? I want to know because I don't get better unless you tell me. And finally, I'm a big communicator. I love talking to people. Only way you learn is by chatting with people. Email me, call me if you want. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Tom Rieger in Minnetonka, Minnesota, USA. And it's Rieger. I just had a chat with somebody earlier. They keep wanting to put the E before the I. So I'm sure my German friends on the call appreciate the difference. But please make sure that you jot these things down. I would love to hear from you, whether you put them in the Q&A session or you communicate to me directly. With that, I would like to actually call it a wrap. We'll give it about 30 more seconds for anyone to type into the tool. But otherwise, I do appreciate everyone's time here on a Wednesday morning here in the lovely tropics of Minnesota or wherever you may be in the world. With that, we'll go ahead and call it a wrap. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tom. And there was just a few comments about getting the recording. So yes, a replay of the recording and the slides will be sent to the email that you used to register after the session. And we will review all the questions that have been submitted and be sure to follow up with you later. So thank you all for joining us today live. We hope you have a great rest of the day.